when we talk about the mental, conscious and unconscious configurations of separate self, who we are as a person, the one that I am, what I am, where I am. It's really very much to do with time and space. The storyline that we build either on the macro of our biography, which of course goes into the future of what we would, or what we unconsciously expect to be fulfilled in the future. This is very much connected with time. And that's not just macro, it's also micro. What we're doing today, what's the program, what will be next. So part of our energy is already, in the break, having a cigarette. And this is almost an automatic program of mind to work through these kind of structures of linear time. But experience is made of two factors, time and space. And the time one we're very good at manipulating. We really play monkey business with time in our creation of stories and our retelling in our heads and our editing and censorship and juggling the order and moving history around a bit and making what's actually happening fit in with what we think should happen. All of this is kind of time games which aren't really present. But time exists in space. It's all to do with negotiations about space. And space can only be experienced now. It can't. Any other experience of space is already an imagination, or a memory, which is a kind of imagination as well. Because memory is very changeable. Changeable. For example, a lot of healing occurs when you remember the same incident, but the feeling quality to the events changes, the content. Or, as years go by, we can remember the same incident that happened to us when we had a contracted space as a child, with not many options. And from the adult perspective, there's a lot of space around it, so a healing can happen because this space factor is added. So in the addiction we have, this collective addiction to being a private individual, space is a main component. My inner space, my public space, my private space. But it's not the space itself which is the problem, it's where we're drawing the lines, as if, or more, where the lines are drawing us, where we get stuck in the lines. Meaning we don't choose to put a border here and say, this is where I want to take my space. The border comes of itself. This is where we become, in a way, contracted, separated. And often that's unconscious. I mean, if we ponder what's our space in this moment, where does our personal space end and the public space begin? It can be a little curious because we have options. There are possibilities. It can be in the circle, it can be physical, This is where I end, and he begins, and he only gets to go up to his own skin. You know? It can be in the high street of Glastonbury. But none of that's really true, because within this space are our loved ones who are not here as if physically. You know, my mother is here, deeply here. She's here too. She's at the core of the private space in a way. I'm kind of helpless in that. Your husband and children are here. You can feel them. They're here. They're not just here. They're not here physically, but they're here somewhere. The connection's always alive. It's a much bigger here when we begin to give space to space in a way, when we begin to refine it. So, but still we have this private self that we carry around, and that's totally okay. It's natural. But what we like to do is to liberate it in a way so that it has more freedom and possibility. There's nothing wrong. It's like with it. It's like a body, but it doesn't need to be a prisoner. And part of the programming is in what we take away from ourselves, what we refuse to be, what we refuse to allow. So Bart talked about loneliness, for example. Loneliness is a suffering at first, or a fear even more than the suffering, something we tend to fear. We don't even really get to feel it. It's because it's so not allowed, it's so shameful, and, you know, which is unfortunate because it's quite deeply true as we go inside to meet loneliness. But still, it's not really the aloneness, it's the sense of being separated in space, or unseen in space, like, and lost in time as well, like not existing almost. It's a kind of suffering to do with isolation. And on the flip side of that coin of loneliness, we often find trouble with intimacy. They dance together, which is exactly the same principle of where do I begin, where do I end, and where does the other begin? And in that trauma or difficulty or discomfort around touch, being seen, being in time, being in space, being in a body, we contract, and then we call it loneliness, but actually we were afraid to be intimate with, first of all, our own body, with being here at all. They tend to dance together, and it can look a bit desperate, because you don't want to be intimate and you don't want to be lonely, and this game goes on through the social field. You know, intimacy can be incredibly intimidating, in a way, when we're wounded there. It's very, very, very fearful. We think we're afraid of loneliness, but intimacy, whoa, it can be nauseating because of some wounding that's happened, some violation, some sense of lack of safety, normally. And it's not uncommon, it's kind of collective, the fear of intimacy. We are, as human beings, in a collective contract of non-intimacy, in a way. You can see it on the underground, you know, everybody. Partly because it's so shocking. It's so shocking to be here and to see the other here. But you can already see how close that is to awakening, to the beloved. You can't kind of fall in love with everybody. You've got to give it a time and a place. But you can actually, if you don't hold on to it, if you don't grasp it. It's totally possible. So There are many, many such twin traps, like loneliness and intimacy and fear and anger and all kinds of sufferings of being somebody, being a person. And it all could look a little bit helpless, except that there's always a third point which is so abundant and so undamageable, and with so much space. I mean, space loses its meaning. It's so to be taken for granted. The problem is that we forget it. We forget these third points. And this is where the beloved is, in a way. At the source level of who we are. So, in the spiral, for example, of loneliness and intimacy, what's always here at the same time is absolute unity. Absolute unity. Unity.
Oh, unity.
Yeah. It's all a little bit pee-pee-kaki, this whole game of intimacy and loneliness. When you're able to really fall back in the unity which is anyway here. It's a pigeon. They line up on the roofs as a lovely collection of doves. Yeah. They're listening, reporting back to my parrot. So, if you take just, for example, the contraction of loneliness or intimacy, and you allow to also be here a totally given unity, and it doesn't matter which kind of unity, we're all alive. We're all conscious. We all experience love. We all suffer. We all carry the physical, part of the physical. This is always here. It's always shared. It doesn't matter if we meet a tramp on the street who's asking us for money, or if we meet the Queen of England. It's utterly there. There is no border. So this unity is a really strong place, for example, to allow within ourselves. It's not unity in terms of bringing together. It's simply a oneness over which there is these games of unity, or negotiations, or attunements, in a way, of loneliness and intimacy, or fear and anger. It's also about where do I begin and how do I find form with the other. But when we sit somewhere underneath, and we can trust in that, be that, all of this gets a freedom. It can attune according to what's needed. And it also gets a freedom in time, which means that if we don't want to be intimate, it doesn't say anything about us if we're in unity. We can say, I don't want to be intimate right now. Or I feel lonely right now. So everything can be fulfilled and easily let go. Everything can just pass in an ocean of experience. It's not a problem anymore. It can be natural. Does that make sense? So this space, the spatial factor, we are educated to believe that space is nothing. Which is probably the most incredible misconception possible that we could be bringing forward into the structures of our minds. You know, anyone who draws or paints knows that the focus on the space between is that which brings forward the beginner's mind, this fresh perception. Things come to life by virtue of the space between. If there was no space, there would be no matter. There would be no thing, nothing at all. That would be nothing. Space allows the whole of creation, whether it's in any individual thought or moment, or whether it's in the cosmic planetary scale. And it's the same space. And this space is not in any way empty. You know, we empty. I'm not talking about emptiness now, but we're programmed to believe it's irrelevant and doesn't matter and there's nothing to be got from it. We can't clutch it and we can't push it, so it doesn't count in our business here. Rather than honouring it as potentially full of aspects of who we are which are not physical and not created, like love, peacefulness, and that's kind of something to explore, what's in the space. You know, it's first when we feel into the space we can feel maybe our own sense of self, how it feels to be who we are in any moment individually. But that's okay because there's all the space to see what's between the particles of selfhood in feeling. What's between the particles? What's arising? What's here? There's all the space. And in the same way, you know, it doesn't really matter when it comes to the spatial dimension what's ours and what's not. Meaning, if we think of something which opens our heart and we feel love, it doesn't stop there. We can allow the love to fill all the space. It's not separate. It's not separate because it rides on our awareness. It will go where our awareness goes. And then there's the biggest question of all, which is our awareness private? Is our awareness ours at all? Is it private? Is its source somewhere inside of us? Does our awareness really is it possessible? Does it have a beginning and an end? Does it have borders?
Does what have borders?
Our awareness.
Okay.
Is it ours at all? Or is it that we are, through our organs, like the mind and the heart and the form that we are processing an awareness, each in his own or her own unique way, which can change from moment to moment. So that's an open question to explore. For that we need to be choosing for awareness. Let the mind be curious about awareness. Let the mind be ready to give permission to us to relax a place where maybe there is a feeling contraction. Relax it in the sense of not, relax it, knock it on the head, but relax it in the sense of give it all the space to be. And that's only possible when we don't see any consequence of it. It's really okay to feel whatever we feel, so we can let it be in this space of awareness. There is this key question which you will hear if you go into non-duality, which is that between When you ask the question to yourself as you're walking through town or doing whatever we're doing, am I aware now? In the asking of that question, before any answer comes in the sense of a thought, like, yes, I am, in that space between the question and the next thought, this is where the beloved is. It's not a thought. Thought can open the door with this question, am I aware now? Am I aware that I'm aware? And sometimes we don't need an answer in a thought anymore.